Hello, my name is Isaac, and in this video we'll take a look into the support vector machines or SVMs, one of the most powerful algorithms in supervised machine learning. SVMs are used for both classification and regression, and their main goal is to find the optimal boundary called hyperplane that best separates different classes of data. The points closest to this boundary, known as support vectors, are the most important because they define how the model distinguishes between categories. When the data isn't linearly separable, SVMs use kernel functions, such as polynomial, rate of basis function, or sigmoid, to map the data into higher dimensions, allowing the algorithm to draw flexible and curved decision boundaries that capture more complex patterns. So now let's take a look into a Python code of the SVM implementation in Python. First, I import numpy, which is for working with numerical arrays and basic math operations. Next, I import matplotlib by plot, which will allow me to visualize the decision boundaries and scatter plots of our data points. Then we're going to import SVM. Here I import the SVM model from scikit-learn, which contains the SVE class used to create and train the support vector machine. Now I import the make classification, a utility to generate a syntactic dataset that simulates bank customer data for the example. Then we're going to call another function that splits the dataset into training and testing subsets, so I can train that model in one part and evaluate on unseen data. Then we're going to export scikit-learn metrics with two metrics: accuracy score, which gives the percentage of currently predicted samples, and classification report that shows precision, recall, and F1 score. Then we're going to call another two functions called scikit-learn preprocessing and pipeline. These two are for preprocessing. The standard scaler standardizes features so they can all have the same scale, something that helps SVMs perform better. The pipeline allows me to combine both the scalar and the model in a single workflow. Now we're going to generate and split a dataset. This line creates 100 data points with two features, both informative and uses a random seed for reproducibility. It simulates customers labeled as high or low credit risks. Here, I also divided the dataset so that 75% is used for training and 25% for testing. Now I define the function that plots the decision boundary. This function receives a trained model and the data to visualize. Inside the function, we have that the padding equals to 0.15 and rest equals to 0.1. Now I added a small padding around the data and set a grid resolution to plot the plot smoother. Now we have these lines that find the limits of the data on both axes. Then I create a mesh grid of point covering the entire area. Then I use the model to predict which class and grid points belongs to. That reshapes prediction into a 2D form suitable for plotting. Finally, I will fill each region with a color representing that predicted class and scatter the training points over it. Now we define our kernels and realization values. These are the 4 kernel types I will test and 3 values for C, which controls that margin. A small c allows wider margins but more classification errors, where a large C fits more tightly to the data. This dictionary stores the best model found for each kernel. Next comes the main loop where we train, test, and compare. For each kernel, I started by initializing variables to keep track of the best accuracy and configuration. Here, I create a pipeline that scales the features and trains an SCV with the current kernel with the C value. This line trains the model using the training data. This makes predictions on the test data. These two lines compute accuracy and the classification report. If this model performs better than the previous one, it is saved as the best for that kernel. After finishing the loop over C values, I store the best configuration for that kernel. Finally, I print the results and visualize the decision boundaries. So now let's take a look into the code. As you can see here, we have the linear. As you can see, a linear line. When we have the points polynomial, a bit more curved. Then we have the RBF that it's a bit wavy. And then we have the sigmoid that it's more pronounced wave. Conclusions. Throughout the activity, I explored how different SVM configurations affected model performance. I started by using the C parameter, which controls how strict the separation is between classes. Smaller C values allowed a wider margin but more errors, while larger ones made the model tighter and more precise on the training data. I also experimented with different kernel functions, linear, polynomial, RBF, and sigmoid, to see how much shapes the decision boundary. The linear kernel created straight separations, the RBF kernel created smooth, flexible curves, the polynomial added more complex contours, and the sigmoid behaved similarly to neutral network activation. Comparing them visually made it easier to understand how each kernel adapts to the data. To evaluate results, I used the classification report, which includes accuracy, precision, recall, and F1 score. Looking at these metrics together with the plots helped me identify which kernel achieved the best balance between generalization and accuracy. In conclusion, the exercises showed how support vector machines can adapt to both linear and nonlinear data simply by churning a few parameters. SVMs are powerful because they rely on support vectors, the most important data points, and can flexibly model complex relationships using kernels. By scaling the data, adjusting C, and analyzing results visually and statistically, I gain a clear understanding of how SVMs work in practice and how to select the right configuration for real classification problems. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.